What's up everybody, it is Dan Cam, and today I am bringing you a review of the DrunkDeer 75% magnetic switch keyboard. So this keyboard doesn't have your conventional mechanical switch, it is actually magnetic, it uses Hall effect switches, and I really think that this is going to be the future of custom keyboards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into it. Alright dudes, there was the unboxing, the sound test, and the RGB demonstration, but just keep in mind that I barely covered what this keyboard is capable of with the RGB. I only went through some of the presets, but there's a ton more presets, and you can basically customize this keyboard to look however you want. I'm pretty boring. I like a static color, usually like white, red, blue, or something like that, or like a slow changing color cycle. But this keyboard looks fantastic, guys. I love the RGB, and it is bright, and I mean very bright. So let's talk about magnetic switches and how they work. And while the technology isn't exactly new, I think it's fascinating how these switches do work. But before we get into that, let's talk about other style keyboards, and we'll start off with the membrane keyboard. So how this keyboard works is anytime you press a key down, there is a rubber dome underneath that collapses. And when it collapses, that tells the keyboard to send a signal to the PC that you're pressing whatever key you may be pressing. And it's usually not the best feeling keyboard, and it's very unresponsive, and you'll usually find this on lower end budget keyboards out there. And then there are mechanical keyboards, and the way this keyboard works is each key has an individual switch, and whenever you press down any individual key, two contacts touch each other, and that will tell the keyboard to send a signal to the PC that you're pressing any individual key. So there is a physical contact that takes place in order for the keyboard to communicate with the PC. And then there's the magnetic switch keyboard, which works off of, you guessed it, magnets and a magnetic field. So these keyboards utilize a Hall effect switch, and the way that this switch works is there's a magnet within each switch, and when you press the key down, it creates a magnetic field. And once the keyboard senses this change in magnetic field for any particular switch, it sends a signal to the PC that you're pressing that key. So there's actually no physical contact that takes place. So these switches are much more reliable, and they're rated to last way longer than a mechanical switch. Most mechanical switches are around 10 million to around 50 million keystrokes, while this DrunkDeer switch is rated up to 100 million keystrokes. And because it uses a magnetic field, there is much more adjustment that takes place. You can actually set the actuation point for each key from 0.4 millimeters to 3.6 millimeters. So let's go ahead and jump into the demo on how to adjust the actuation point. So the actuation point is currently set at its highest level, 9, aka 3.6 millimeters, and demonstrating with the A key, you can see when I barely press the key that it's not registering within Notepad. I have to fully press the key down in order for it to register a keystroke. But on the flip side, if I go to the first level by doing FN2, 1, I'm gonna go ahead and backspace here, I just have to barely touch the A key. And I mean, I'm barely touching it right now, and it's registering keystroke. So the lower levels are fantastic for gaming because you don't have to fully press a key down. And if you're all over the place with pressing Q and E and R and all those buttons, it's awesome on the lower level. So it'll register it just by the slightest touch. But if you're typing and you need accuracy, then it's better to go to the higher levels. I usually stick to around 7, 8, or 9, which has given me the best accuracy. All right, so let's talk about everything else with this keyboard, and we'll start off with keyboard shortcuts. So there are a ton of keyboard shortcuts you can use, and I'd actually recommend using over the app, which I'll talk about in a second. But there's things like changing your RGB brightness, or changing the RGB preset, or switching from a Windows computer layout to a Mac computer layout, or changing the actuation point, which I just showed you in the demonstration prior. So there's a ton of keyboard shortcuts. And if you go to DrunkDeer's website, they have an owner's manual for the A75, and that will list all of the available keyboard shortcuts. And then there's the DrunkDeer Antler app, which basically controls all functions of the keyboard and then some. And if you're planning on going with the A75, I would highly recommend it, because when I first hooked up the keyboard and loaded the software up, it prompted me to update the firmware, so I did that. But within the app, you can update the keyboard, You can change all of the key assignments to whatever key you'd like it to be. You can change the actuation adjustment like I showed you in the demonstration prior, but I actually like to use the keyboard shortcuts so you can switch from typing to playing a game really quickly. And then you can change everything from the RGB, like the presets, the brightness, and you can even change the RGB for pretty much any key you'd want. So any individual key can be a certain color or a certain scheme. You can basically do whatever you want. And then within the app, you can also change and set up your own macros, which is awesome. So if you have certain macros you use for Adobe Premiere or for whatever program it may be, you can set all of those up super easily. But I think that covers just about everything with the keyboard. And if you want to see all the specs, I didn't go over all of them, but I'll have them listed in the description and down in the pinned comment. So let's jump into my review for the DrunkDeer A75 keyboard. And I love a good pros and cons list. So let's just go ahead and jump into the pros to start. And the first one is going to be RGB. So the first point I want to make is that the RGB is extremely bright. I don't know if you guys noticed during the RGB demonstration, but my camera had a hard time keeping track of when it went from extremely dim to extremely bright. It had a hard time adjusting because the keyboard is extremely bright and all the colors look extremely vibrant. So I was blown away with just how bright this keyboard is, and I actually found myself turning down the brightness a little bit. And the second point I wanted to make with the RGB is that just the levels of customization, like you can literally change each key, you can change sections of the keyboard, you could use all of the presets. There's like 25 different presets. And when I first got this keyboard, I thought the RGB was going to be kind of an oversight, but the RGB is actually one of the main selling points for this keyboard. So the next pro is going to be typing feel. So once you find your actuation point for different tasks, this keyboard is an absolute game changer. For me, when I'm typing for accuracy, if you guys didn't know, I work from home and I do a ton of typing on this keyboard for work. So I like it around 7 or 8 for the most accuracy. I thought that 9, which is the highest level, it just sunk down a little bit too deep for me. So 7 or 8 was perfect. And then when I'm gaming, I like to go anywhere from 3 to 5. So if I'm playing an FPS, and I always play mouse and keyboard, if I'm playing an FPS and I need to hit Q or tab or caps lock, I found like I didn't have to fully press it down to get the key to register, and I never like missed a keystroke. So the typing feel is just absolutely fantastic. And that's gonna kind of segue me into my next point, which is the sound. So the sound is absolutely fantastic with this keyboard. It does sound a little bit hollow, but at the same time, I think it sounds great. It's got kind of a clack to it, especially the spacebar, and maybe some foam will kind of lessen that hollow sounding I'm hearing, but the keyboard sounds fantastic, but that's all subjective. So refer to the typing test to see if this sound is right for you. The next pro is going to be the volume knob. As funny as this is to say, but this volume knob feels fantastic. It definitely feels like it's metal. I haven't taken it off yet, but it's got these knurls on it, and it's not a free spinning volume knob. It's actually notched. So each notch on a Windows PC will change the volume by increments of 2. That's how Windows does it for some reason. It doesn't do it by 1, so it's 2, 4, 6, 8. And each notch is an increment of 2, and it just feels really good and solid. I don't know what it is about it, but the volume knob feels fantastic. And when you press it down, it acts as the pause button, and it just feels really good to press it down. So the volume knob is a huge pro for me, because if it didn't have a volume knob, like I don't even know what I would do. I'd probably have to set up some kind of keyboard shortcut, but the volume knob feels absolutely fantastic. So the last pro I want to talk about is the price. So the MSRP is $150, and at the time of this recording, it is $130 for this keyboard. And I think for what you get, it's an absolutely fantastic value. And if you compare it to other keyboards that have these switches, it is much cheaper. So I think the $150 price point is well worth the asking price. And for $130, I think it's a steal. I absolutely love this keyboard. So I think the price is a huge pro because it's definitely significantly cheaper than some of the other keyboards in this same kind of niche that this keyboard is in. So let's move on to the cons for the DrunkDeer A75. And the first one I want to talk about is the height of the keyboard. So this keyboard is very tall. And if you're the type of PC user that doesn't use a wrist rest, I don't think this keyboard will work. At least for me, I usually always like to use a wrist rest, but I think a wrist rest is absolutely mandatory. And the one I'm using, the height is absolutely perfect and it feels great. But on the lowest level, this keyboard is extremely tall. And then if you use the little feet that flip out, I just think it's obnoxiously tall. So it's all preference, but I think if you're gonna use this keyboard, you may want to buy a wrist rest with it as well. So the next con is pretty much just gonna be a con for me, but this keyboard is not wireless. I love wireless peripherals. I've been using them for years and I just don't really like cables. So I'm really hoping that they come out with a wireless version in the future, but at the same time, that's gonna probably dramatically raise the price. And I know a lot of people don't care and they like their cables, especially when you buy like a nice coiled one, and which I actually have and it looks fantastic. But I just like wireless just because it's simple, but you don't have to worry about charging this keyboard, which is awesome. So that's a con for me, but it's probably not a con for the majority of keyboard enthusiasts out there. So the last con I want to talk about is the modability for this keyboard. So this isn't like a traditional mechanical keyboard where you can go buy different switches if you don't like how these sound and just swap them right in. You're pretty much stuck with this switch, but at the same time, hopefully you're doing your research, and when you buy this keyboard, just know that you're buying this keyboard for the magnetic switch. So you can't really mod it like a traditional mechanical keyboard, but if you do want to get inside it to lube the switches or maybe to add some foam or like a different gasket or something to try to quiet it down or whatever you may want to do, you can do that, but just don't buy this keyboard thinking you're gonna, oh, I don't like this switch, so I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to this switch that I know I like. So the modability is not really there, but like I said, at the same time, you're buying this keyboard for the magnetic switch. So that does it for the pros and cons list, guys, and the pros heavily outweigh the cons, and all of the cons I had were actually probably just user preference. With the going wireless and the height of it, that's all pretty much subjective, you know, depending on the person. So I would highly recommend this keyboard. If you're interested in it, I do have a link in the description and in the pinned comment, but I would highly recommend checking out the DrunkDeer A75. Well, that's gonna do it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you found it informative, please drop a like for your boy and subscribe if you're enjoying my content. And if you're interested in the DrunkDeer A75 magnetic switch keyboard, it's kind of a mouthful, I'll have it linked down in the description and the pinned comment. Well, once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see y'all in the next video.